Every great video game needs a good villain to help carry the story, but sometimes those villains just fall flat. We've seen it all, from villains who have indecipherable motivations to poorly written characters, and in today's video, we're going to talk about some of the lamest villains, those who never lived up to their hype and failed to be intimidating or memorable, at least in a good way. I will give a slight spoiler warning, just a heads up, and with that, let's dive into some of the villains that truly missed the mark. Up first is Shelby from Heavy Rain. If you've played Heavy Rain, and really honestly even if you haven't, you're aware that the plot is packed with loads of twists and turns. One of the biggest of those is that Shelby, the seemingly kind and somewhat awkward private detective you've been controlling throughout the game, is actually the Origami Killer, a serial murderer who has been stalking the city. One of the biggest weaknesses with this idea is that, like every other protagonist in Heavy Rain, you can hear Scott's thoughts when you play as him, and everything you've seen and heard so far would lead you to believe that he's just some regular guy. There's really no hint or clue that he's hiding a secret identity, so when that reveal happens, it feels unconvincing to say the least. The leap from a seemingly good guy to a killer feels way too jarring, and it's really hard to buy into the idea that this guy was the murderer all along, especially after we played through an entire section of him very gently caring for a baby. Now, I get that characters can have layers and duality, but with Scott, there's no build-up, there's no hinting at a darker side to his character, just a sudden, oh yeah, by the way, he's the bad guy moment that feels really surprising and not in a good way. Let's move on to Mickey and Lou from Far Cry New Dawn. With Mickey and Lou, Far Cry New Dawn introduced us to the potential of a new kind of Far Cry villain. These two are significantly younger than prior villains in the franchise, and they're sisters. The potential for them was definitely high, especially after we'd had Voss, Pagan Min, and Joseph Seed back to back. I think players were excited to see who the franchise's newest villains would be. We were introduced to Mickey and Lou early on in New Dawn, and they are cast as the leaders of the Highwaymen, a ruthless band of raiders who, led by the duo, were meant to bring chaos to Hope County. However, after the likes of those aforementioned villains, Voss, Pagan Min, and even Joseph Seed, Mickey and Lou felt like a letdown. Their motivations are about as basic as it gets, and there's very little exploration into what makes them tick and why they're doing what they're doing. They aren't compelling, they aren't very interesting, and they really weren't written or developed with enough charm or depth to make them memorable. Unfortunately, after some of the more iconic and complex villains the Far Cry series has given us, these two just don't leave much of an impact at all. Now let's talk about Leng from Mass Effect 3. Leng was framed as the ultimate rival to Commander Shepard, but wow, did that not work out at all. Leng is arrogant, smug, and maybe worst of all, very forgettable. He's meant to be Shepard's rival, a far more ruthless version of the Commander, which probably sounded really cool on paper, but in reality, it didn't come through. Though Kai postures as a major threat to Shepard, the game never actually backs up all his posturing. He's totally underwhelming in combat and narratively lacks any of the charm or depth that he would need to really feel like a rival to Shepard. This all results in a character who wants to be iconic but never gets close. And in a story like Mass Effect with rich, well-developed characters, this whole situation is extra noticeable. Let's move on to the Institute from Fallout 4. Now, all honesty for a minute, Fallout 4 was not particularly well written. But even taking that into consideration, I feel like there are very few factions in gaming that are as poorly written as the Institute. They claim that their mission is to secure humanity's future, yet spend most of their time kidnapping people from the Commonwealth, replacing them with sense, and generally engaging in violence and plots to destabilize the world above ground. You know, where most of humanity is. Their actions consistently undermine their stated goals, making it really hard to understand what their actual intentions are and what they actually stand for. And the whole twist of having your full-grown child take on the leadership role, while I'm guessing this was meant to add emotional weight, I think we can all agree it entirely failed to do that. The fatal flaw with the Institute is that you really can't understand or empathize with them in any way, because they make no sense. And how could you be expected to take them seriously as a faction if you can't understand why they do what they do? Finally, let's talk about Ryder from Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Ryder is actually a well-written, complicated character, until he suddenly becomes a villain. For For the majority of the game, Ryder is portrayed as a loyal member of Grove Street and one of Carl's longtime friends. He has moments of greed, but never anything to suggest he would betray everything he's shown allegiance to. Because of his close bond with CJ and Grove Street, Ryder's betrayal should have been absolutely devastating, but instead, it clearly wasn't handled well, leading it to really just be confusing. Ryder's alleged motivations are very basic, and his perspective and reasoning is entirely unexplored. Twist betrayals aren't a bad thing if they're handled well, and we can understand them, but this isn't one of those. Whatever the reason that this character and storyline got the treatment it did, Ryder deserved better, and so did players, honestly. That wraps up my overview of some of the lamest video game villains. While these villains aren't necessarily bad characters, they really fall short in their roles as villains. We expected so much more from them, and they really disappointed. Who do you think deserves to be on this list? Let's talk about it in the comments. If you like more content like this, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.